But thank you for being here, and thank you for inviting me to speak. I've been in a number of Rotary clubs the last several weeks.
Is the microphone?
From Little Washington,
Felix.
Prairie, to downtown
Felix,
Raleigh. I've
is
done
your
a number of
microphone
Rotary
on?
for the Durham Rotary. I'll be there on the 31st of August, so you can come here the second time. I've had some people here 3 or 4 times. They get so excited. But thank you. It's nice to be back in Chapel Hill. I moved to Raleigh right after graduating from UNC. But I rarely get over here, so it's always a pleasure to come back. So when he mentioned the greatest crisis in education in 30 years, it goes back to 1998. And I don't know how closely you follow public education. There's been a lot in the news about teacher pay, and we're going to talk about that. But the actual funding of public schools and teacher pay was a crisis in 1998. So how many of you remember that? Now I can tell that I'm not the oldest person in the room, but I certainly having graduated from Chapel Hill in '76. I was actively working, had 4 children. Governor Hunt was an education governor, Governor Martin as well, so both parties. And they had a crisis, and Governor Hunt called the big business leaders into Raleigh in 1998 to talk about the crisis they were having, which was they were funded at 46th in the country in per pupil spending, and teacher pay was at 48. Does that sound familiar? Well, we're right back there, except we have a problem. The governor is saying not much. Big businesses are saying nothing. And I've been working on this really since 2023, when it first came to my attention. I was still actively engaged in the career at the time. But I couldn't get people to go and speak to legislators. And so what we're going to talk to you today about is hopefully getting you all angry enough to say, you know, even though I'm retired, I've got to do something. And the handouts you have, the most important one to me is this little half piece of paper. Now at the end, you'll see a QR code up here. I'm not very good at QR codes, but I can fill out a piece of paper like any good accountant. And I'm hoping that a number of you will fill this out. I'm not going to ask you for money. I'm not part of a charity. Education is everyone's business. It's just what we call ourselves. It basically is me and Lindsay. And I've been, this is probably my 35th to 40th, somewhere in their presentation across the state, trying to get business leaders to get active and be aware. And when I say that to you, no money, and the most time you could spend on this, if you got really active, might be 5 or 6 hours between now and November 3rd, election day. That's all. So I saw most of you volunteered for a couple hours coming up Saturday. So this is only about trying to save our teachers and our public schools and asking each and one of you to get involved. If you're retired, you're a former business leader. And what I will tell you, what brought me the most attention, why I said I got to do something instead of being really retired and playing golf, is I talked to legislators and said, how often do you hear from business people? This is pretty rare. How about public schools? Never. How about the corporate tax rate? Never. How about individual tax rate? We don't hear from business leaders unless it's about regulation. And that was more than just one. So I've heard that from a number. 2 years ago, we tried, in public school forum, and I tried to get people to go with information to speak to the legislator, and they didn't want to do it one-on-one. They weren't comfortable that they'd be able to argue with the legislator about it. So we are now using a different model. We are recruiting an army. Right now we have about 400 business leaders that have said, I'll help. This is a problem, and we can't sit idly by. And a lot of them look just like us, older. So for me to have a successful day, I know you're going to be interested in what I have to say, and all of it's public information. But for me to have a good day, I need people to fill out those forms. The box will be up here. Hopefully you'll drop it off. And if you do, we don't give that information out. We're not going to ask you for money. All you'll be doing is you'll be invited to attend one Zoom meeting. The next one is the 17th at 4 o'clock. We'll have information, and it's one meeting a month for 1 hour on a Monday afternoon, and talk about what's coming. What's coming is basically after Labor Day, every seat in the House and Senate is up for election November 3rd. they will not be in session. They will be campaigning. And the only time legislators listen is when they are campaigning. And it's our opportunity as business leaders to say, go to these meetings and say, I'm a business leader, here's what you've done as an incumbent. Explain to me how that's good for our state. And as you'll see, they've done things that are not good for our state and not good for the future. Okay. Here's the hard part. I'll push the right button. Look at that. I'm not so bad techie after all. We're going to start in teacher pay. The best part is I can probably do this in 30 minutes if I take no questions until the end. So we're going to talk about teacher pay. And the reason that's important, our total funding for K-12 education in our state comes from the legislature. It's supposed to, by law. They pay for everything it takes to run a school. Local school districts and counties are supposed to pay for physical structures and capital. Over time, that has eroded tremendously, whereas local communities are spending a lot of money. As you all know, in Chapel Hill, Carrboro schools, Orange County, Wake County. Wake County spends $4,000 per kid on operating the schools, not the capital. That's for teachers that are no longer supplied, etc. The state only gives Wake County $7,500 per student. So it's gotten that bad that the counties, where they're affluent counties, can step up and do that. But I'll promise you, of 115 school districts, at least 80 of them are poor and they hardly get any money from their counties. So teacher pay of our $12.5 billion, that is the total general fund for K-12. Teacher pay is the pay for our 100,000 teachers is 60% of that. That's why teacher pay is a big deal. And thankfully, the legislature did do something this year. But prior to this year, they weren't doing much. In fact, if you go back to the recession that hit in 2008-9, teachers did not get a raise. 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014. They didn't get any raises. They went another 3 years without raises. They finally got a significant raise in 2024, which got them to $41,000. As you can see in your first set of stapled handouts, take your paper clip off as we're going to flip through. You can see when it got to 41,000 on July 1 of 24, it went up from 37. We were last in the Southeast. Now, I'm an old guy, so we used to say, well, no matter how bad it gets in North Carolina, at least we're better than Mississippi, because Mississippi is not a very bad state, but it is the poorest state in the country, by far, way poorer than we are. And as you can see on that first page, they were at 41,500, a Republican-led state. So they were investing in education. They did other things. They're done. Talk about the Mississippi Miracle. That's a whole other subject matter. But you can see in the Southeast, in the states that are primarily funded by the state constitution, we were last. Now, the reason I put it that way is because across the country, most states are funded primarily by local school taxes and property taxes. The state funding is about 8 states, most of them in the Southeast, where the state takes responsibility primarily, and then counties, communities do it. But there's not very little taxing authority for school boards, certainly not in Wake, not in North Carolina, that's not allowed. So they rely on county commissioners to do it. So we were last in the Southeast, July 1 of 24, and that's when it went up to 41,000. If you look on the back of that, you'll see the pay scale for a career in teaching on the back of that. Turn it over. And I bet, if you look at that, I bet you would never say, you know, I bet Kentucky is the best paid place for teachers. But as you can see, that's where it was, Kentucky. All the states are better than North Carolina. All right, so this year, we didn't have a budget last year. No teacher raises last year again. And what did they do this year? Does anybody know what teacher pay got raised to? Got an 8% raise. Anybody else know anything? They did raise that, but I mean, it's just about teacher pay. Look at your next handout. It looks like this. And this was the $41,000 pay, which had been in place for 2 years. So look at your chart, because I'm going to walk you down. I want you to look at this. Bachelor, we stopped paying for master's degrees, PhDs. They used to have a 10 or 12% supplement. 10 to 15% supplement. We don't have to pay those anymore. That stopped years ago. The only thing we pay for is National Board Certification, which is the right side of this chart. But I want you to look at, starting at $41,000, that's 10 payments of $4,100, and look what your pay scale is. By the time you get 15 years in, you will have gone all the way up to $53,880. Now, I bet you don't have a single employee in any of your businesses that you could have hired and said, you know, we'll start you at 41, and if you do a great job, 15 years from now, we're going to have you paying $53,880. That's what the state pay scale was 2 years ago. But look after year 15, and you'll see there aren't any raises. Why would the legislature say after 15 years we're not going to give you a raise? I don't know. But I can tell you this, it takes 20 years to get a state retirement. So if they're 5 years, you have to stay 5 years longer than your last raise to be eligible for state retirement. Last year, beginning of last school year, 8% of our teachers quit. We had 100,000 teachers in our public schools. 8,000 of them didn't show up. Now, I'll talk about how that hole was plugged, which was with international visa teachers from the Caribbean all over the state, especially in the eastern part of the state and the highest poverty school system. And then alternative licensing, as it's called, or lateral entry teachers, which you heard of like tutoring. I tutored second graders in math last year, which, by the way, a CPA can still do that. Not pretty hard. Now, these are the kids who are behind. And I can tell you all about what it's like in the classroom these days, and maybe I'll allude to that. But if you do look, if you stay to your 25th year, you get one more raise, but then you never get another raise. And the teacher I was working with had 35 years of experience. The other 4 second grade teachers at Conn Elementary in Raleigh were less than 5 years. She was, forgive the expression, the mother hen to the other 4, trying to keep them engaged. They were making 41 or 41,750 or 42,500. Very little, and then she had all the most difficult students. So there's more stories I can tell you about what it's like to be in a classroom with difficult students. They eliminated teacher assistants. Did you know that? K-3 has no teacher assistants. They shrunk the class size from 23 max to 20. So there's no teacher assistants. So I want you to imagine, close your eyes, 20 kids sitting out in front of you. You can picture them in your little desk, right? You're all sitting there. Smiling at the teacher, listening. Well, keep in mind now, we have 15% in our schools, 15% are non-English speakers. So 3 out of the 20 are not primarily English speakers. They also have very high attendance problems. 1 or 2 are what's called ADHD. And even as an accountant, I could tell which kids they were in this classroom, because they won't sit still, not for a minute. So when I would go in and tutor, she'd give me the 4 to 6 all year long. We're so far behind, there's no way they're going to be passing in the course tests. In fact, if the other 14 did, which she was working on, the ones I was working on were at first grade level at best. One came in March, little Hannah, she was the prettiest little girl. She didn't speak any English at all. I was trying to teach her addition, and I spoke English and she spoke Spanish. There are no ESL kids in that school, ESL teachers. They're not funded. I also work in the Nightdale schools, 900 kids in News River Middle School, 1,600 at the high school, 80% high poverty, 95% kids of color. Each school has one social worker. That's how much the state pays for. One social worker. Now, if you're designing schools to fail, that's the kind of stuff that you would do. So this was the problem, and they heard from border counties that this is bad, because in every border county, you could go to Virginia or South Carolina and make $5,000 to $6,000 just by going across the border to teach. The legislature heard that. And they decided to have a budget, or they'd really be in trouble in election year. And they raised teacher pay to $48,000. 17% raise for beginning teachers. 5.5% for experienced teachers. All teachers got a raise. That's great. Look at your next handout. Just flip the page. This is the schedule comparing the old schedule and the new schedule. You see it? So it's got it in terms of months, right? 4,100 per month in column A schedule, and the B, the next to it is 4,800. Everybody see that? Okay, so that's 48,000 to start. Now look at what they look forward to now that they're making 48,000, more than last year's starting pay in Virginia and South Carolina, but they have not set their new starting pay schedules yet. That's legislative as well. But look what you can, as a teacher, all right, I'm making 48, that's a lot better. I think I'll hang around. The next year, you're gonna make 48,250, then 48,500, then 48,750. After 4 years, you'll be at 49,000. After 8 years, you'll be at 51,000 after 8 years of being a teacher. That's the scale that the legislature put in place to solve the problem. And if you stay 15 years, you'll be all the way at 56,000. 15 years to get $8,000 more dollars. Now, if you had a kid who was thinking about going into teaching, and it's a calling, not everybody's good at it, I'm not particularly good at it, but I respect the ability and how important it is. What would you tell them about going into college for an education degree? Well, that's great. You better be aware that you won't get paid anything. Here's the pay scale. The legislature published the 48,000, they published the 17% to 5%, average 8%. Did any of you see this schedule before today? Let me get out there. If you did see the schedule, what would you have said? That's ridiculous. Who would go to do that? Well, again, that's 60% of our total K-12 budget. 95% of the total K-12 budget is for people. None of them are particularly well paid, but teachers are the bulk of it. 5% is for non-salaried items from the state. But they've cut the number of people, they've cut supplies, so charities, Rotary groups, service providers, they do provide supplies because our state can't afford it. And whenever you ask the legislature, why didn't you do more? You can't afford it. It's a tight year for the budget. We'll come back to that. But that's what's going on here. They said they solved the problem. Now, this little number right here, we used to have 3.5% turnover in our educators' workforce, 100,000, and that's charter schools, and this public schools are public and charter together. We used to have 14,000 total getting in the colleges of education. About 85% of those go through the UNC system. And they were graduating 3,500 a year who were licensed teachers taking the praxis test and going on and teaching. And they could look forward to a pay scale that Governor Hunt, when he raised taxes in 1998, as the business leaders told him to. The last year we had a tax increase in North Carolina was 1999. We're going to come back to taxes. We went from having 14,000 students down to 8,000 students in education. The actual number just got released in the UNC system. In 2012, we had 12,500 students in the UNC system who were majoring in education, intending to be teachers. That's undergrads. Got to start there. Now, there were people doing masters and PhDs back then, and there's still people doing masters and PhDs. Normally, it's to move on to do administrative roles. By 2024, we were down to 6,600. Again, that's more than 8,000 because there are private schools that are also teaching education, but the UNC system does most of it. So we now have 8,000 graduating, 2,000 teachers a year, and then there's a math test for you. Check your second grade math. 8% turnover on 100,000 teachers is what? 8,000, and we're going to graduate 2, and every state around us makes more money. They also play local supplements just like we do. Chapel Hill Carborough pays a big one. Wake County pays an average $8,500 per teacher supplement to work in Wake County, the teachers. So we have got this. If we have another 8% turnover show up in school starting, and they don't do that count until September. If it's 8%, and hopefully the 48,000 has convinced a few people to stay longer, where are we going to get 8,000? There are not 8,000 teachers licensed in the Caribbean who want to move to North Carolina. nor there are 8,000 banging the door to be $48,000 a year former CPAs teaching math to second graders. That's not a pay scale that's going to bring people in. Now, it could just be, that's just teacher pay that's a problem, but it's more than that. There's one group called the Education Law Center based in Philadelphia, and they do a study of all funding by local and state for K-12 education. It comes out every 2 years. It came out in December. And it ranks 50 states in the District of Columbia from top to bottom. As you might expect, the Northeast funds education the greatest. And who do you think was 50th? The great state of North Carolina. The great state. So look at your next handout. Now I have taken the liberty of taking page 10 of that, and you can Google that and download it yourself. It's Education Law Center, December 25. It's 30 pages worth reading if you don't mind your jaw hitting the table. And I've highlighted 4 states. The pink one at the bottom is North Carolina, at $12,193 per student. Again, that is state and local dollars. And it averages every one of our 100 counties and 15 urban districts, it averages it in. And we're at $12,193. The state pays about $7,500 of that. Now, if you look above it, the next pink one going up is Mississippi at $13,500 in 44th place. The next one above that is Virginia in 37th place at $15,008. And then South Carolina is almost national average at $17,698. Now this is last year's data. So as legislators do things, these numbers are going to change a little bit. But we didn't do enough for teacher pay to dramatically move us out of 50th. So what happens when you multiply that times 1.53 million public school students? That's how many we have last year. We have 160,000 private school students, and we have about 200,000 now in homeschool, which is the fastest growing place to educate the child. Well, when you multiply this difference between us times 1.53 million, that's per pupil funding, we are $2 billion behind the importance we place on public schools in Mississippi. How could that be? Why did we not know that? What were we doing? What was I doing to work so hard crushing stone for highways and buildings where I couldn't pay attention to that? We're $5.4 billion behind Virginia. And of course, the most stunning is we're $8 billion behind South Carolina. Not a state that jumps to your mind thinking, now that's the education state I want my kids to go to, right? Virginia might think they're better than North Carolina, but we know we're better than South Carolina, right? Well, we're not. In fact, it's dramatically worse. Now, how could that be? How could we have fallen so far behind? Now, while we are doing that, and we don't have enough money, even though we're the #1 state for business, something is not making any sense here. No money for raises, 25, 26. In 23, 24, there was $100 a year for teachers. That was the raise. So your next handout talks about school vouchers. Anybody heard of that? How long have they been around? Since 2014. This is by a group I call Public School First NC. It's one of the 20 education nonprofits, all of them funded by foundations and individuals, all dedicated to treating the symptoms of our problems in education. And they got great documents. You can Google this document, Public Schools First NC. Do Public Schools First NC Opportunity Vouchers, started in 2014. Designed for poor families to get out of the failing public schools. They'll give you money to go to a private school. It started in 2014. Almost nobody did it. And you can see, 2014 to now. For 10 years, almost nobody went into them. In the 9th year, they decided to increase it from, well, they actually increased it from 1 times the poverty level to 2 times the poverty level. And still nobody went. Now, why wouldn't poor families leave their, quote, failing school, normally their neighborhood school, to go to a private school? Undoubtedly, there's better education, right? All the private schools don't release any data. Well, how about because they don't provide transportation, They don't have free and reduced lunch and breakfast that are federally provided. Right? They don't have free food for their kids. They don't have special education. A high percentage of economically disadvantaged students need special education services. Some people weren't going. So what did our legislature do to fix it? Did they fund those things better? No. What they did is, well, we're going to take the cap on what you qualify for up to $100,000. You can still get a voucher even if you make $100,000, and we'll pay for your kid to go to private school. They have to leave public school to private school. And still, it'll be money. So in 24-25, as this handout tells you, they removed the cap altogether. You could make any amount of money and your kid can go to private school and get a voucher, a tax rebate. And your child never has to even go to public school or ever go to public school. They're still called opportunity voucher to leave a failing system. 87% of the kids who got vouchers, of the 616 million the legislature put in 2024-25, went to parents of kids who had never been in a public school in their life. You can call that an opportunity voucher, and instead they changed it to school choice. Who doesn't like school choice? That sounds catchy. Back then they came up with something even catchier called, money follows the backpack. Your kid goes to private school, we're going to give you money for that, so we don't have to pay for it. In 25-26, they put 650 million in. And in this legislative session, they increased the amount to 705 million. That can go for vouchers for kids who've never been in a public school, whose parents want them to go to a private school, with no accountability at private school for any of the things that public schools must provide by law. Now, you all pay taxes, I'm pretty sure, just looking at you, look like taxpayers. So are you happy that your money is being used to help people go to private school? Well,
No.
don't you think you should? People should have school choice, right? We should pay for that. No?
No.
Well, you know what? I bet, raise your hand if you called your legislator and said, this is not right. No? I didn't either. This is what's been going on for years. Business people have been silent. Big businesses are doing nothing. And as to why they're doing nothing, I made one call to a very big bank, and I asked him to get the COO to get involved in Charlotte, headquarters. He was just as passionate about all this as I was. He said, I'd love to, but I'm going to have to check with our CEO, and I'm pretty sure she's going to say, no, don't touch it, don't affiliate the bank's name with anything about this. This is viewed as political. Now, I haven't really said about politics. I'm unaffiliated. I don't care who's running the government, as long as they do the right thing. What they've been doing is not the right thing for our state, in my opinion. We can't have teachers with no promise of future income, without a working wage. No chance to do better. By the way, there's no money for teacher development anymore. They eliminated that. They have no coaches. All these things are picked up by local communities now. They don't have supplies. You know how many supplies go through an elementary school K-3 classroom? I got to look at that teacher's closet. It was unbelievable. And the kids are going through stuff like crazy. It's a lot of money in supplies. Not anymore. At one point, we cut textbook dollars to $1 a year per kid. We cut the number of guidance counselors, social workers, psychologists, and nurses. All got cut. They had to balance the budget in 2009. They cut. The biggest line item in our budget is K-12 education, and it took a bunch of cuts. Are we still in a recession? No. We're out of recession. Who's the #1 state for business? We are, right? We've seen it. Everybody. It's always us, or maybe it's Austin, or Texas is pretty good, whatever it is. But we're right there. People are moving here all the time because we got so many good things, including great schools. At least that's our reputation. So when the economy started to rebound, and you had to cut all this education spending, as a legislator, what would you do? Would you restore what you cut? And have they done that? No. they did, your next handout, they started in 2014 tax cuts. So we last raised taxes, and Governor Hunt got the backing of all the big business leaders, and Governor Martin, in 1998, to raise our taxes, and they would stand by it. And he did. The corporate rate went up to 6.9%. The individual rate went up to 7.75. And the businesses didn't complain. I don't remember people complaining, I don't remember complaining, but nonetheless, the money was going for education. By 2001, we were 25th in the country in teacher pay and 25th in total funding. And everything was hunky-dory, right? Anybody remember anything in the early 2000s? There was, it was a dot-com bubble burst, and there was low interest rates. Then we had a housing boom bust. Then we had the Great Recession, and it was a long recession. That's what I remember from the stone car business. We went from 200 employees to 120. That's what I was paying attention to. I didn't pay attention to the fact that teachers got no raises for 6 years. I also didn't pay attention to the fact that the corporate and individual tax rates were getting cut every year. Now, this was done by the leaders of the House and Senate. The leader of the House at this time has moved on. He's a congressman now. The leader of the Senate is still with us. But the top line in this case is the individual rate, and it was 7.75 in 2013. And it had already come down by 2015 to 5.75. And you know where it is today? Last year when you filed your return, your top rate was 3.99. I'm going to call that 4. Okay? I don't know why they like 3.99, but 4%. As of January 1 of this year, your rate fell to 3.5%. The corporate rate was 6.9 and come down to 5, and as of the beginning of 2026, it's 2. Raise your hand if you ever called a representative and demanded lower tax rates. I have yet to meet a business person that has ever called about tax rates. It's never been discussed in a Chamber of Commerce meeting, to my knowledge. It's never come up in the Raleigh Chamber of Commerce. It's never come up in the North Carolina Chamber as far as complaining about our tax rates. But yet, this is what's happened. And there's a constitutional amendment on the ballot November 3rd to permanently limit our individual rate to 3.5%. Right now, we have one of those at 7%, done many years ago. And if it does that, the legislature's hands will be tied. Now, you might be saying, well, wait a second. Now, this is really confusing. Our tax rates are going down. We're number one for business. Maybe that's why, maybe not. I don't remember asking for them. They decided to do this. And yet our border county states, they're paying a heck of a lot more for education, investing in it, than we are. How can they do that? For all 30 years, South Carolina's corporate tax rate has been 5%. Their individual income tax rate has been 5%. Virginia's the same. Although their corporate rate is slightly higher than that, let's just call it 5. Do you know how much money we would raise if our rates were 5 individually and 5 corporate? Every 1% individual rate is $4.25 billion. So when they cut us from 4 to 3.5, it's going to take $2 billion out of our next budget year. Remember, 40% of our whole general fund goes to K-12, and we're going to cut $2 billion. Well, we've come down from 775 down to 3.5. We don't have to go back to 775, but if we go back to 5, we'll add $4.25 billion and be tied to the North and South states. There'll be no incentive for anyone to go to other states. Don't want that. Corporate rate, $800 million. That's how much 1% generates. And I don't care if you go to 6.9 or not, but you put us at 5%, from 2 to 5, it's going to generate 3% or $2.4 billion more money. So when people say, we're $8 billion behind South Carolina, how the hell could that have happened? Sorry. How could that have happened? That's not appropriate. Well, if we go back to 5 and 5, we raise $6.5 billion. Now, I will tell you, if we did that in one day, that every educator in the state would have a heart attack and die. So I don't recommend us do that. And we don't want to all do it at once. But if we pass a referendum that limits us to 3.5, we're going to further decrease spending in K-12. I don't know any corporation who wants a 0% corporate tax rate and campaigns for that, but that's what we're legislatively already been decided. And when they did this legislation in 2012, 13, it was brilliant politically, and I'm not good at politics. But now, even if your own party says, we can't have a tax increase, and you think, well, we need money for public schools, you have to vote for a tax increase. And that's like the death knell for anyone running for office. So you all look like pretty smart people. Which is more important? Education of K-12 students or corporate and individual tax rates? These are our NAEP scores, National Assessment of Educational Progress. 31% of rising ninth graders can function at a proficient level in math and 27% reading. Interestingly enough, our state sends 30% of its students after high school education, has for years. Okay, that sounds about right. If they're proficient in high school, then they're able to go to college. That sounds good. And my question is, what's happening to the other 70%? Because these numbers haven't changed much. And the 26 testing results just coming out are going to be similar. I tell you where they go to work. They go to work in places that you go and shop. They go to the quarries. By the way, our beginning quarry truck drivers made about $65,000 as 18-year-olds. All they need is a driver's license. But they had trouble reading the employee handbook. They could not understand 401k plans, and they could not understand the company health plan. I noticed that for our last 10 years. Like I said, we got to do something. Our employees don't know how to read. And that's what's coming out. So the 30% that are proficient, again, haven't changed. They're going on to college just fine. Head of Wake Tech is a great guy named Scott Rawls. He called me and said, we got to do something. I said, what are you talking about? He said, the kids coming out of East Wake High School and Nightdale High School, they have 6% of functioning at a math, senior, at a high school math level. And they want to go to community college. They can't take our even beginning courses. They're finishing, they're not motivated, they're not attending post-COVID. There's no money to help them catch up. Those 75% poverty kids in Eastern Wake County, in Nightdale, where I work, and where I tutor, and where I taught classes, those kids don't have a chance. The 30% of them that are moving on, and some do move on, they'll be fine. And while we're not figuring out what the heck we're going to do about AI, what we're not doing is helping these kids that are in school graduate with a degree where they can read and do math at a high school level. They don't have that. They may be graduating. So we'll go back to number one for business, right? By the way, we don't fund pre-K. Governor Hunt, Smart Start. If you're telling me I'm going on too long, I'm sorry about it. Questions will come at the end. Pre-K, we fund 25% of the kids who want to go to pre-K, so 75% of the poverty kids don't go to kindergarten ready to learn. We don't fund CTE, technical education at a level we should. You go out to rural counties and they go, we need a lot more money for CTE. Every kid that goes through CTE graduates and goes on and gets a job. We're not funding those either. But we are number one for business. I want you to imagine yourself as Christopher Chung, the head of Education Partnership in North Carolina. We have done a great job. He must be a great recruiter. And I want you to picture you're on his team. You're recruiting international companies or local companies to come to North Carolina. You've got great mountains, you've got coast, you've got great weather. It's not really that hot in summer over here, I promise. And we got great universities, slam dunk. We got a great community college system. They will help you train your workers. And we have an 87% graduation rate for our high schools. Best it's ever been. And when you hear educators who go to their schools, you know what they tell you? I got a great school, I got a great faculty. They never badmouth their own schools. They don't tell you what they're missing. When they take a legislator to work day, they only say nice things. But the fact is, they don't have the tools, the money, the financing, they don't have anything to help kids get to where they need to be. And I will promise you, as a business model, I'm pretty good at math. You're never going to be 50th in the country out of 50 and end up number one for very long. That isn't going to happen. 87% of that money that's going to vouchers are for kids that have never been in a public school. And lastly, the corporate tax rates. Who voted for that? You're going to get a chance to vote in November. And that's it. So If you know how to use a QR code and you'd like to join, and again, joining is not about money, it's about agreeing to do something. Honestly, you don't have to fill this out. Raise your hand if you feel compelled to do something. The rest of you are nodded off, probably. Hopefully, you're all compelled to do something. Our state depends on K-12 students doing well. We have to get involved. We have to do something. So, thank you for your time and attention. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
We have. This is. Well.
Oh my God. What?
We have 3 minutes. Let me try to shine if I can. What is the difference in the racial makeup of our public schools versus our voucher schools?
Great question.
He asked him what's the racial makeup of the public schools
Your
versus the.
microphone was working.
Your microphone.
got it.
Okay.
I've asked the question. You may want to put the
Say
mic
it,
on.
but-
We've got 2 minutes.
okay. The difference between the racial makeup of the public schools and
Private schools? Is that what you asked? Public versus private?
Yes, that was what he asked.
Okay. I couldn't tell you what the private school makeup is. That they don't share that information. My guess is it's very high, white, Caucasian, as is the makeup of the home schools. The public school numbers are about, Wake County are now under 50% white. I don't know what the whole state is, but it's significant as people leave. Private schools haven't grown so much, but homeschooling's grown a lot. So I don't know. I know the numbers are decreasing, and they're increasing a lot the last 20 years for Hispanics, Asian, and others, so the minority is going up tremendously in public school.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much for a very informative presentation. Can you comment on what is happening with the lottery dollars? I thought the lottery dollars were going to be allocated and directed to education. Any insights on what are the barriers?
They are. They do. The education lottery is still an education lottery. It's passed by Mark Goodfastnight, a Democrat, in the dark of night by 1 vote, with the promise that it would not supplant general funds, and then 6 months later he did that. It was originally generating about $100 million a year for school operations, for teacher pay and other things. The laws have changed. It now raises about $400 million. It goes to public schools, and each year the legislature can decide where it goes. So it can be used for HVAC replacement in rural counties. It can be used for anything they want it to be used for. They decide each year. But it's about $400 million a year is what's in 25-26 budget, which for $400 million to come from that. So you also know fines and forfeitures, no matter who pays them across the state, you have a speeding ticket. Eventually that money gets to public schools, but it is about 3.5 years behind. As to why it takes so long, I don't know. But that's estimated at another $300 million a year. But $400 million a year, the percentage payout, the lottery tickets are about $4 billion a year, and the payout is still $400 million. Hasn't changed in the last 10 years. So they reduce the payouts to get more people to play it. Okay, someone right here had a question. Yes, sir.
Do you have data on the performance of the kids in the private voucher systems versus the public schools?
They do not have to release anything in the private
There
schools.
are no state tests or things like that that they have to take?
No, there's nothing that gets reported to the state. So, no way of knowing. So the voucher money is state money, but they don't have to report how that voucher's kids perform. I do know this, if a kid gets kicked out of a private school,
they have to be taken right back into the public schools without funding. So they intend not to take behavior programs. All right, that was the last question.
Thanks for a great talk, a great presentation. Thanks, everyone. Have a nice weekend, and we'll see you next week.
Not sure it's worked out. And most of the kids, get to private schools. Oh my God.